Welcome, dear friends, to another episode of the Totus Tuus podcast. Today's guest, Edward Deskur, is a re-Polonized Swiss-American. He graduated with a Bachelor of Music from the Eastman School of Music, University of Rochester. He was a founding member of the Singapore Symphony Orchestra in 1979 and has worked at the Zurich Opera House for 32 years and is currently retired. He is also the nephew of the late Andrzej Cardinal Maria Deskur, who has played an instrumental role in his life growing up. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome today's guest. Welcome, Edward.
It's great to be here. Thank you for the honor of the invitation.
Yeah. So, Edward, I'm happy to have you here because we have heard so much from Jan, your cousin, about the late Cardinal Deskur, and even more so how he is such a close confidant of St. John Paul II, who is the patronage of the Apostolate. So I'm very happy to be having you here to hear the insights that probably the general public would not know. You probably have special insights into the friendship, into the life of the late Cardinal. Yeah. So maybe first off, you can share with us about your family tradition, being a Deskur. Yeah, I was hearing on the way, when we were coming for this podcast, that you say that the Deskur family is a small but close-knitted family.
That's true. Of course, we're primarily a Polish family, but my parents left Poland during the war. My father is a prisoner of war. My mother is a 12-year-old refugee. They eventually went to the United States, which is where they met, and I was born and raised there. But most of the family has been in Poland the whole time. We've been in Poland since 1732. Many of our ancestors had very important roles in the history of Poland, particularly in the army, fighting for the independence of Poland. But of course, the most illustrious is the Cardinal.
Yeah. And so how did you first encountered the Cardinal, since you were actually born and raised in America? And he was probably in Poland, or maybe at the time he was already in Rome?
Oh, he was in Rome since 1952.
Yeah.
And I got a Fulbright scholarship to study in Belgium in the 80s. That's when I also went to Poland for the very first time, and when I discovered the wonderfulness of the Polish culture and the traditions, and I decided to re-Polonize myself. I learned the language. Eventually I married a Polish woman. I speak Polish with my wife, English with my children. But when I went to Poland in 1981, or no, I'm sorry, 82. No, let's start again. When I went to Poland in 1982, during the very difficult time of the martial law, I ended up meeting the largest groups of the family in Poznań and Krakow in English. And when the Krakow cousins, who I got very close to, when they heard that I was going to live and work in Zurich, they said, "Oh my goodness, that's great, because our uncle, the Cardinal, spends his summers very close to Zurich, and you should go and meet him." And I thought I would go once just to meet him, and I did, and I thought that would be it. But no, we became very good friends, and he ultimately became my spiritual father. I would even say a second father to me, because I met him very soon after my own father died. So he took over that fatherly role in my life.
Okay. And what were some of the fondest memories you have of the late Cardinal?
Oh, too many to tell you all of them, but I will say, of course, for me, my marriage in St. Peter's Basilica, which he officiated, was, of course, one of the greatest moments.
Wow.
He also confirmed me. But there was many discussions, very interesting insights, not only about theology, but about life, about politics, about art, and also about humor. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and many of my fondest memories of him are actually his jokes. Yeah. He would collect jokes, and he had many guests, and he was the court jester of the Vatican to a certain degree, collecting the jokes, and he would entertain the Holy Father at the Sunday lunches to which he was invited.
I see.
But as far as most memorable moments, I'd say, well, probably the first moment I met him. I thought it was, I was expecting just a courtesy visit, very short. And of course, I used his official title at the time. He was an archbishop, so I called him Your Excellency. And he said, "Oh, please, 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 please. We're family. Call me Andrzej," which is very unusual, actually, because even in Poland, you normally, even with your uncles, you don't always call them by their first name. You usually say uncle. But he accepted me as a member of the family, and he wanted to be extremely available to me as a priest, and that's his vocation. And in this context, I can remember something that I thought was very beautiful and funny at the same time, because I was in my 20s at the time, and going through all sorts of interesting parts of my life. And he once said to me, "If you ever have a problem and you want to call me, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning." And I said, "Oh, come on, I'm never going to wake you up at 3 o'clock in the morning." And he said, "No, please do that, because if you do, you'll give me a double pleasure. Number one, I'll be able to maybe help you. And number two, I'll have the pleasure of falling asleep a second time." And he had the gift of knowing how to introduce a little element of humor, and if possible. Of course, he was a very serious priest. He was a moral theologian.
Yeah.
And he corrected a lot of my misunderstandings about the Catholic faith, for which I'm extremely grateful. But if possible, he always added a little bit of humor and to the seriousness, and balanced everything out. It was wonderful.
Wow. Yeah, from the way that you described, I can see that, his personality is something that you've been drawn to. Yeah.
Absolutely. He was also a fascinating person because he was paralyzed just before the election of John Paul II, so
Yes.
well before I met him. He was confined to a wheelchair, could hardly walk at the time, and after a few years he couldn't walk at all. He was confined completely to the wheelchair. And he was clearly suffering, but he was one of the most optimistic and positive people I've ever known, because he has this very special understanding of how suffering is an integral part of life, and you have to accept it and dedicate it to somebody. That's, I'd say, a central part of his ministry, if you will, showing people that suffering isn't just a condemnation of fate. It's something that can be turned in a positive way. So, for example, he shocked me when he said, suffering is a privilege. And I didn't want to accept that at all. And he said, the more I suffer, the closer I am to Christ, because Christ suffered for us unimaginably. And he also had this very beautiful and very constructive understanding of suffering, that it's like a very precious coin with which you can attain graces for other people if you dedicate your suffering to somebody else. So he dedicated his suffering primarily to the Holy Father and to anybody he's praying for. And that raises suffering to a completely different level. And he saw meaning in it, and he was always very, very, in a very good mood. I've never seen him depressed. I've never seen him sad. He was always very, very positive, very, very optimistic, very, very helpful, despite his infirmity.
Yeah.
Very inspiring.
So that must have stemmed from his deep prayer life, you would say.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, Pope John Paul II wrote the Apostolic Letter Salvici Doloris. And, whatever you just said was, it's basically the Cardinal's life is a testament of what John Paul II was saying in the letter.
I think
about
to a certain
giving Christian meaning,
That's true. I think to a certain degree he helped the Pope write that. He helped because the Pope wrote in a letter to the Cardinal's mother, who was still alive after he was elected Pope, thanking him and mentioning that it's for him a great mystery why people very close to him either died or had serious accidents at every stage of his development as a priest. When he was, I forget exactly who died. I think his mother died when he, close to when he was ordained a priest. When he was made a bishop, I think his father died, and then when he became a cardinal, a good friend of his who was a bishop in Lviv, we called it Lvov, had a serious accident, and just a few days or a day before he was elected pope, his close friend Andrzej Maria Deskur had a stroke, and he was unconscious during the election. At the time he was a bishop, so he wasn't in the conclave, but he was in the hospital when the pope was being elected.
Yeah.
And he came out of his coma a while later and went to Switzerland to be cured for a while, but then came back to the Vatican and was in full possession of his intellectual and spiritual capabilities, but physically he was in very bad shape.
Yeah. So, and it was also beautiful because Pope John Paul II, actually termed, this as the apostolate of suffering, that it becomes a personal apostolate for everyone who suffers, that, in the Christian, in our Christian faith, we know that there is the transcendence of suffering, that, there's a greater meaning to it, and that when it's united with the sufferings of our Lord himself, it bears fruit. And
exactly.
Yeah. And, it's so beautiful because when you mentioned that the late Cardinal especially offered his suffering for Pope John Paul II, I very much believe because he knows the weight of the papal office. Yeah. And what was moving was the fact that Pope John Paul II, after being elected Pope, broke with tradition. Actually, the first thing he did was to visit Cardinal Deskur in the hospital. Yeah, so I read that, and and it also goes to show that close friendship, because that was, I think, the first time apparently that people say that people knew who Cardinal Deskur was, because back then people didn't know that close friendship between Pope John Paul II and Cardinal Deskur.
That's true. Although at the time of the election of John Paul II, he was a bishop.
Yeah.
Then he was raised a few years later to this, the status of a archbishop, and I believe it was 1984 or 85 that he was made a cardinal.
Yeah. By John Paul II.
We call him the cardinal, but at the time he was a bishop.
Yeah, correct. So, what we say, would you have some special insights into their friendship between John Paul II and the cardinal?
Well, he didn't talk about that friendship too much, but I knew that they did study together in the university and the seminary in Poland. Both of them, together with Cardinal Macharski, were in the committee of the student association, and there was a funny moment when they finally, all three of them met together after the election and after the reconvalescence of my uncle. The three of them met together and said, now we have a quorum for the student association. We can open a meeting of the student association, because I think they were 4 members and you needed at least 3 to have a quorum for that committee. So they had a little joke about that sort of thing.
Yeah. And you mentioned that because the cardinal was already working in Rome, while Pope John Paul II at the time was the Archbishop of Krakow, right, before he was elected.
That's true. He was one of the very first non-Italians who were invited to be in the Curia. So he started in 1952. So he had a lot of experience. He knew who was very saintly, who was maybe corrupt, who you should avoid, who you should come close to. And in a way, he was a bit like the Sherpa of Cardinal Wojtyła, guiding him through the labyrinth of internal politics in the Vatican. It's a very complicated world, he was telling me many, many times. That it's a very old labyrinth with lots of different groupings that, if you will, fight with each other. And it's not easy to navigate. And he even mentioned that some people were actively working against the church, that were in the hierarchy, but they were too powerful to get out of the hierarchy. They were actively working against the church. In other words, that the Curia was infiltrated by people from the KGB, from various mafias. And he said at one point, point blank, he said if he said everything he knew or heard and saw, a third of the Curia would have to resign the next day. But he underscored that was a minority. The majority are very hardworking, very saintly people, and that's why the church survives. But it's a very complicated world, and somebody from outside needs an experienced insider to guide them through the labyrinth of the politics. Oh. And that was one of the things he did for him.
Yeah, so you could say he paved the way for Pope John Paul II when he became Pope.
True, and also it's an open secret that he was famous in the Vatican for having the best cook and the best wine cellar. And for the honest priests, those are the delights that they have every right to enjoy. So he got a reputation of having excellent food at his home, and nobody would refuse his invitations. And before the conclave, he would invite the most important cardinals to get to know Cardinal Wojtyła closer, with a whole series of dinner parties with absolutely excellent food, very good wines. And that was a bit of his secret. And I can recommend that to people who are also outside of the Curia. It's a very, very wonderful tradition to offer wonderful food, wonderful wine. It brings people together. And that's also one of his, one way that he helped John Paul II get well known among the cardinals, because there was probably about 130 cardinals at the time. Yeah. They didn't all really know each other that well. People did know Cardinal Wojtyła, but of course he wasn't Italian. Yeah. And it was a great opportunity over a very good dinner to get to know him, his ideas, his vision for the church, and he obviously convinced enough cardinals to vote for him.
Yeah. So, you were sharing about all these internal politics within the Vatican and how complex it is. Has the cardinal ever shared about, like whether he wanted to leave the job?
Oh, no. Yeah. But he would joke about it a little bit. Yeah. One of the jokes is, the question is, how many people are working in the Curia? And the answer is, about half. Because you have to understand, it is Italy. Most of the people in the Curia are Italians, and there's a certain work ethic that's known in Italy. They work well, but they're not always working. They take a lot of breaks, and they like their vacations and things like that. So he had a good sense of humor about that sort of thing. Yeah. But I would say he never spoke in great detail about these things. He just spoke in principle. Because I think I was a young man, and an active Catholic. He thought maybe I had a vocation, and I could feel that he was sort of opening doors for me and getting me introduced to various bishops and cardinals, and I had very interesting discussions. And ultimately, I think I convinced him that being a classical musician is a vocation of its own, that also has its dignity, and I think he accepted that. Yeah. And but I think at the same time, he always had this in the back of his mind. Maybe there's a vocation here, and so he was always doing everything he possibly could to support that.
Okay. And over the course of these years, you've visited him quite often, not just in Rome, but also in Switzerland. Yes. Right? I understand that during the summer break, he would go to a convent in Switzerland. Yes. To spend time there, and you paid him many visits.
Absolutely. He was very close to Zurich, where I was living. He was there for about 2 months. Yeah. And it was perfect for me because he was there, I was there, and it was wonderful because we always had interesting things to talk about. Not only theology, but history, Polish history, art. One thing on art he gave me, there's 2 stories about art that I like very much. Mm-hmm. Number one, he has this idea, and I kind of believe it, that if you look at the Pietà Michelangelo's sculpture, the marble sculpture. He said for him, what is so timeless about it is that if you look at the face of the Virgin Mary, she could conceivably be of any race. She could be Oriental, she could be African, she could be European. She has a universal face because she's the mother of us all. Mm-hmm. And that for him was a absolute masterful way of presenting the Virgin Mary. Okay, it's white marble, so it's whiter than anybody could ever possibly be. Yeah. But if you look at the eyes, they're not clearly European, they're not clearly Asian, they're not clearly African. She could be anybody. I thought that was really beautiful. That was one of those moments of high culture and art. And then another story that I like very much, he had a tabernacle in his chapel, because in his apartment there was a very beautiful chapel. And on the tabernacle there was an incredibly beautiful sculpture or embossed in silver, an image of a pelican with 3 children, and the pelican giving his blood. And that's the symbol of the Eucharist, because in the times of drought, a pelican will give the pelican mother will give her own blood.
The sacrificial nature.
Yeah. It's so beautiful. I just absolutely loved it. I was just mesmerized by it. And I asked him once, do you know who did that? Who was the artist who made that? And he said, no, I don't. And I don't want to know. And he really made a point. I don't want to know. And I was surprised. And of course, I asked him, why not? You're very interested to know who it is, maybe see some other works of his. And he said, well, the reason I don't want to know is because this chapel was taken out of a side chapel of St. Peter's Basilica, and it was the part of St. Peter's Basilica where Michelangelo was working. And Michelangelo is known to be an artist in many, many, many fields. And if it turned out that it was Michelangelo who made this pelican, then they would take it away from me immediately. So he loved it as well. And he didn't want anybody to take it away from him. And he was maybe afraid that it was something from Michelangelo. But it was so stunningly beautiful. And I still to this day have a strong memory of it. It's super beautiful.
Yeah. And, I believe that he must have been also a great Marian devotee.
Oh, absolutely.
And, yeah.
When you knock on the door to enter his office, he doesn't say, come in. He says, Ave Maria. That's how he invites you into his home. Very Marian. Yeah, very Marian. And he taught me the whole, my understanding of the Marian devotion, because I was brought up in America where the Protestants very strongly criticize Catholics for having a Marian devotion. And I told him about that. To me, it's a little bit too blasphemous in a way. It's not. She's not a goddess, and many people treat her as if she is a goddess, and I have a problem with that. And he kind of smiled and he said, "Oh, I can see you're under the influence of the American Protestants." But let me tell you, the true nature of this devotion, and it was very beautifully presented, because he basically said, in a nutshell, the devotion to Maria, the Totus Tuus, is the ultimate imitation of Christ. He said that Christ could have, or God could have presented himself to the world in the context of time and space in any way he wanted to. He could have written in the clouds. He could have written words that people would read in the clouds and be very impressed with it. He even joked, if God wanted to, nothing could stop him from manifesting himself as a speaking carrot that everybody would be amazed at when the carrot is speaking wonderful words. But he chose to incarnate himself as a human being through the Virgin Mary. And what he did ultimately, what Christ did, was he was entrusting himself completely to the care of the Virgin Mary. And if our ideal as Christians is to imitate Christ, who are we not to do that as well? And I found that a very beautiful way. And ever since, I've been a very Marian person. And the idea is that, for me, it's not only Totus Tuus, but also I love the Angelus prayer, that fiat mihi secundum verbum tuum. May it be done unto me according to your word. And not according to your will, but according to your word, which is Christ, the incarnation of God, which of course includes the will of God. Yeah. But I love that wording because it's so rich. And it also inspires me to reverse what I was taught to do as a child. You know, children are taught to pray asking for graces, asking for gifts. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the higher level, higher order Catholicism is exactly the reverse. Not so much do we ask for things, but we ask God, what do you want from me? Mm-hmm. And we say to God, whatever you want is what I want. Even if that means suffering, then I accept that. If you want to give me graces that are delightful, then of course, happy to accept that too. But anything you want to give me, any trials, any crosses, any suffering, I'm going to gladly accept it because it's from you. And if you look at the life of the Virgin Mary, I mean, she didn't have an easy life. Mm-hmm. I mean, right after the birth, they had to run away because her son was in danger of being murdered.
Yeah.
And at the end of his life, there he was on her lap, her dead son. I mean, she did not have an easy life, but she was totally devoted to doing God's will. And I don't believe she was asking God so much as offering God to serve, that she would serve him in whatever way he chose for her to do. And I think that's the secret of the higher order Christianity, where we're asking less for individual graces, be it, passing a test, getting a job, or, whatever. But the other way around. May it be your will that's done, not mine. And when we turn the tables on prayer in that way, then magic happens. Graces happen. And I found that in my life as well. I got married very, very late. I thought at some point I would never get married. Mm-hmm. And I just, it's up to you. Like, put it in your hands. And then there it is. Then I found the woman that I married. But I married at 44, very late. And I think that's, for me, one of the things I learned from the Cardinal is this idea of course, we can always ask for graces, specific graces, but always at the end of that request, it should be, but may it be your will, not mine. You're not my butler, waiting for me to give you my wishes. It's the other way around. We're his servants. And when we orient our faith in that way, then I think it's a more adult faith, a more developed faith. And in my personal experience, that's when the graces really started coming.
I see. Yeah, and also that's the reason why we adopted Totus Tuus. Of course, firstly, it's because we are inspired by the pontificate of Pope John Paul II, but because his motto is so profound, right? As Christians, we all strive to want to love God, right? And that should be the goal of every Christian. But there's no person who has loved God better than the Blessed Virgin Mary. And when we imitate Our Ladies in her virtues, in her submitting of her whole entire will to God, then we too will know how to love God better.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's why that Marian dimension is so important for every Christian. I never believe that it is an option for a Catholic Christian to have Marian devotion. It should be very essential in a Christian's life.
True.
Yeah.
It is very, and that's why I always have, when I see the Protestants, I always respect their merits and their dedication to the faith, but I always have the feeling that there's something incomplete about how they understand, because they don't understand the power and the beauty of this Marian element that we in the Catholic faith have. And it's not easy for people to understand, because it's a lot of that is associated with Mary is very difficult for modern people to understand. The whole idea of the Immaculate Conception and the virgin birth, it's very difficult for people to accept that.
Yeah.
And so they very often just sort of put it aside and say, oh, well, the other things are nice, but this, well, it's so complicated, let's just leave it. But if you really take a deep dive into it, it's profound. And if you look at all of the great Catholics, I mean, all of the great popes and many of the great saints, they all had a very strong Marian devotion.
Yeah. Yeah, I can think of, the great Polish saints like Saint Maximillian Kolbe, whose feast day we just celebrated, right? And he founded the Militia Immaculata. And speaking of that, I just recalled Jan brought us to that hall in Krakow, where Saint Maximilian Kolbe held his regular meetings with the late members of the Militia Immaculata. It was just amazing for us to be present there, where Saint Maximilian Kolbe was once present in the very hall. Yeah, and you can see how the fruits has passed through time.
Sure.
Yeah.
And if you go to Auschwitz, you can also visit the cell in which he was starved.
Yes.
And where they ultimately murdered him.
I've been to, and I always found, we, even though we're not Polish, right, we've always seen Poland as a very, very special place, a country that is still very Catholic, because, and it's produced so many saints, and Poland has been ravaged by war, and after that communism followed, but yet in the midst of all that suffering, there's something very special, the fact that Polish people has suffered a lot in the history of time, right?
It's true, and there's a very interesting author who, in the 19th century, prophesied or presented Poland the idea that Poland is the Christ among nations. It has to suffer, die, and resurrect for the benefit of mankind. And you can imagine how many Polish people were excited about this after World War I, when Poland finally got its independence again. He was very, very prophetic.
Yeah.
The suffering, dying, because Poland didn't exist as a sovereign state for 123 years, but then resurrecting again. That's quite something. And I think not everybody in Poland is aware of this this poet, but I think people there is something to it. There's something about the Polish spirit. You can kill us, you can destroy the country, but there's still something there. And part of that is that the Polish culture existed and survived over those 123 years because it's not exclusively connected to the land. You can take away even the whole country. For that time, there was no Poland. It was Prussia, Russia, and Austria. But still, the Polish nation existed. The Polishness existed over roughly 5 generations. That's pretty impressive. That's one of those things that impresses me about Poland and inspired me to be part of that whole community. And I'm very happy to live there and be Polish in my own special Polish way. Very unique, not standard, not stereotypical Polish, but Polish, nonetheless Polish.
Yeah, and so it was just so appropriate for the Apostolate, right? As its first place of visit to be in Poland. Yeah, and of course we know we're so edified by the experiences that we made, the friendships, with the hospitality of the Polish people, in your cousin Jan and Father Marek, it feels that, like a piece of us has remained in Poland.
Well, I think many cultures, and particularly Poland, strongly cultivates this very, very ancient idea that a guest is sent to you by God. I noticed that in Yemen, the Arabs have that very strong. In Israel as well, and Greece, Spain, there's a special something about the hospitality. And in Poland, we have an expression, gość w dom, Bóg w dom. And that means when a guest is in the house, God is in the house.
Wow.
And most people interpret it as an opportunity to thank God for the graces that we've been given by spoiling our guests who are sent to us by God. And I like that very much. But I also noticed that same spirit in many, many old cultures who cultivate the really strong culture of hospitality.
Yeah. So, Edward, what are the spiritual counsels of the late cardinal that you have, that till today you live by?
Well, one thing, I'm very, very grateful to him for explaining how to how to make the sign of the cross in a way that guides you into a very deep, prayerful state. Because very often people just, make a sign and say, okay, I'm kind of praying.
Yeah.
And his understanding, and now mine, is that we should very consciously think about what we're saying when we say, in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And he started by saying, first of all, some people think, well, who am I to do anything in God's name? I mean, God is all-powerful, and who am I? But since we have a spark of divinity in us, all of us, we're not only entitled to, we're almost obliged to do what we do in his name. And then he explained his brief understanding of the very complicated Trinity, the Holy Trinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like to share this with you because I find it very, very helpful to me. Basically, what we're dealing with is we've got God the Father, whose full expression cannot be manifested within the limits of time and space. He's actually outside of time and space. Mm-hmm. He was, before there was time and space, there was this divine power and force. And in order to manifest himself in the limitations of time and space, he created Jesus, his word,
he begotten the Son.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This was his way of expressing himself within time and space. So that was the Son. They have the same essence, but Jesus is the part of the Holy Trinity that manifests itself within time and space. And what I found is the most amazing part of this understanding is that the Holy Spirit is the love of the Father outside of time and space for the Son, and this love of the Son for the Father. It's the same love that goes in both directions, that transcends that barrier between timelessness and timefulness. So you've got that love that unites the two, and it's also a love that animates. It animated Christ in the sense of giving the Holy Spirit, gave him life within the womb of the Virgin Mary. But the mystery and the beauty of all of this is that if we try to unite ourselves with this Holy Trinity in prayer, we too can be animated by the Holy Spirit. So when I make the sign of the cross, I do as much as I can to reflect on that relationship that unites and animates. And if I'm in a hurry, or if I'm in the haze of the morning where I'm not really concentrating very strongly, I have a abbreviated form of this, and I think in terms of the unity that animates. And then I ask myself, how am I going to be animated today? Animate me. And I'm open to being animated by the Holy Spirit. And that's how I start the day, that and a prayer of gratitude. And I love that because anytime if I have time, which I often do when I pray, I can sometimes even meditate on that for minutes at a time. Because if you really think about that relationship, there's many, many ideas that can be born in that reflection. And but of course we don't always have lots of time to pray. So if I'm in a hurry, then I think in terms of the unity that animates. And I try to unite myself as much as I can with that Trinity and allow myself to be animated. And that brings me in a much deeper prayerful state than just okay, I'm kind of praying now. And that's one of the many things he taught me.
Yeah. Did he share with you about his coat of arms? Right. So his coat of arms, it's the truth will set you free. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember him speaking about it in any great detail, but I know that he uses the family coat of arms and then the Saint Andrew symbols. Mm-hmm. And I think generally, like most priests, I mean, the truth of the faith is so central. And the truth will set you free. And in that, with that motto, set you free, I'd like to also share another thing he taught me, which really helped me, and I think can help anybody in their lives. He taught me about the 3 conditions to genuine forgiveness, which is so essential. Condition number 1 is the complete renunciation, categorical renunciation of revenge, which people often confuse with justice, as if we are the judges and we can bring justice and we're going to make revenge that'll be justice. It's not. Revenge is always from the devil, always. And to begin with, maybe I should have started with the idea that forgiveness is not pardon. A pardon is something else. Forgiveness is a spiritual idea, and pardon is more removing a punishment that has been announced or a judgment. Now, so the first condition of authentic forgiveness is the categorical renunciation of revenge. The second condition is being genuinely open to a genuine reconciliation. Being open to it, but not to a false reconciliation. There's no guarantee that there will be a reconciliation, but simply being open to it and not closing yourself off to the person you believe did you wrong. Not easy for a lot of people. And then the third, probably the most difficult for a lot of people, is wishing the person you believe wronged you every possible grace. Wishing that person well. Now, the magic of these 3, if you're capable of cultivating these 3 principles, then the baggage of resentment disappears. And you're free. And I really found that very, very helpful in my life, because everybody has people who we believe do us wrong. And some of the times it's genuine, sometimes it's just our imagination. But if you're capable of cultivating these 3 principles, you're free. The baggage of resentment is gone. And also, I think one thing I would add to this is the idea that we're all sinners, and we all deserve punishment to one degree or another, but Christ is full of mercy and forgiveness for us. So if we ask Christ to forgive us, it's very appropriate for us to forgive others. It makes every sense in the world. That we shouldn't be one-sided about forgiveness, only wanting forgiveness and never offering it. Yeah. So that's one of the very, very helpful, if you will, life hacks or faith hacks that I learned from the Cardinal.
That's beautiful. Yes, yeah, and you mentioned about the Cardinal's humor, yeah, and I chanced across one that he spoke about his own self, because because of his illness, right? That
Oh,
had
yes.
left him paralyzed, but yeah, at the same time, because he has many visitors, and he would
Oh, yeah.
and he would say, I'm like the Colosseum, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it's in ruins, but it is very popular.
Exactly. Well, if somebody asked him,
Yeah.
how are you? He would say, I'm like the Colosseum.
Yeah.
A ruin, but very well visited.
Yeah.
He always had a sense of humor with that. But in that context, I'd say one of the way he served the Pope was he considered himself the court jester of the Vatican, because he was every Sunday invited to lunch, or almost every Sunday. Whenever I was there and it was Sunday, he had lunch with the Pope. I had to eat by myself. And once I was invited when a priest who was invited to the Pope's lunch couldn't make it in the last minute. He brought me in, so I had a wonderful little lunch with the Pope and my uncle. That was really nice. But generally, my uncle, like I said, he was considered himself the court jester in the sense that he would himself have lots of guests in his apartment, almost for every meal, and he would ask his guests about their jokes, and there was a big sense of humor. So he would collect the best jokes and entertain the Pope at lunch, which was sort of his time off after the Angelus. There was lunch, and that was his free time, and they would talk about whatever they wanted to talk about. But he would always try to come with a good joke. And one thing I really loved about the Vatican is that the really interesting cardinals and bishops had a very developed sense of humor, and also self-ironic sense of humor. Many people think that popes and bishops and priests should always be very serious. And of course they should be serious on serious matters, but in my experience, not only in the church, but also in my own profession as a musician, I found that the people who are at the really top, those are the people who are, of course, very serious about what they're doing, but they know when and how to introduce an element of humor. And very often self-ironic humor, making fun of themselves. That's a sign of, I think, maturity and understanding and confidence, that they know who they are and they can still joke about themselves. And I think probably, well, there's many jokes that I heard, but my favorite one, I think, is very interesting because it's sort of a self-ironic joke about bishops and things like that. So, for some reason, nobody knows why, the Bishop of Verona is the butt of the jokes in the Vatican, according to my uncle. Okay. Nobody knows why. He's the silliest, the stupidest, or whatever. You know how jokes go. And the joke goes like this. A new Bishop of Verona invites all the parish priests, one by one, to come and talk about their problems. And one comes in, and he's incredibly shy. Doesn't even look at the bishop in his eyes. And he's clearly has some problems. And the bishop said, well, what are the problems in the parish? And no, I don't want to talk about it. I'm so embarrassed. He said, oh, come on. I'm your bishop, and I need to know. And so he finally says, oh, all right, okay, I'll tell you. I'm so ashamed. I shouldn't have done it, but I baptized a cat. And the bishop said, what? I mean, come on, you know you can't do that. And I said, I know I can't do that, but we have a big problem in the parish. The church is in a horrible state, and it needs to be renovated. And we have an extremely wealthy, but very Catholic parishioner who can't stand the fact that in her Catholic house she has a pagan cat. So she offered to pay for the entire renovation on the condition that I baptized her cat. And I tried to explain to her that it's not valid. I'm not allowed to do that. It's wrong. But she insisted, and ultimately I gave in. I baptized the cat, and she paid for everything. And the bishop was startled and didn't really know what to say. And I was thinking, well, I mean, how much could it have been? 15 million euros. My goodness. The bishop's thinking, and then he says, okay, I've got the solution. of course, this stays just between the two of us, and I'll forgive you on the condition that when the cat is ready for confirmation, you send the cat to me. Now, of course, this is a joke that the bishops between themselves will tell. Of course, publicly they would never say that. A bishop would never tell a joke like that, because it would easily, unfortunately, be manipulated by the press of bad will. But at the same time, I think what's interesting about this joke is it shows that they understand that even among themselves, they know there are corrupt bishops. The church, unfortunately, has been saddled with so many scandals through the centuries. That is a fact of life, and they're not denying it. They're actually making a joke out of it. Not joking. They're joking because they know it's a fact, and there are bishops who might even think in those categories. But I found that a very interesting joke. And another one along the same lines, that a young bishop, had a problem that every time he left his home, there was a young schoolboy who was just watching him. Not saying anything, not coming to him, but just watching him and following him a little bit. And that made him feel awkward. So he went up to the boy and wanted to find out if he can do something for him. And he always walked away. He never was able to talk with him. And he spoke about this with an experienced bishop. And the bishop said, "Oh, it's an easy problem to solve. Just confirm him and you'll never see him again." Now, that's also, in a way, a sad joke, because it's talking about the reality that many people feel that they're finished after confirmation. It's like a graduation, they've got their diploma, and they're done.
Yeah.
Which, of course, it's the other way around. That's just the beginning of their adult life as a Christian. But it's a kind of a constructive way to deal with the frustration that they have, that many people distance themselves from the church when they get confirmed.
Yeah. Cardinal Deskur was, held the appointment as the president for the Pontifical Council for Communications, right? And today, the Apostolate has this outreach of the social media platform, and what do you think Cardinal Deskur would have said, if he had been here today, he had been alive today, and looking at the capabilities that we have for evangelization through the media?
Oh, I think he would have a twofold approach. Number one, he would probably want to take maximum advantage of the possibilities, but at the same time, he would recommend that the dangers be studied very carefully. And I think that's also the spirit in which Pope Leon right now is looking at AI and social media in general. It's, of course, a great tool for evangelization, but it's easily manipulated by enemies of the church to sow false narratives. So, for example, I was surprised recently, around the time of the death of Pope Francis and the election of Leon, how many false attributations to the Pope I noticed on Facebook. Completely ideologically oriented. Quotes about being woke. Woke is not being woke is a vocation. Pope Leon, he never ever said that. And that's the danger of the social medias. It's so easy to just throw a quote in there and put a name of a pope, and people swallow it. And I really like the quote that I saw once on the internet was, "Don't believe everything you read in the internet, Abraham Lincoln." As if it were a quote from Abraham Lincoln, which of course is ridiculous because he never knew the internet.
Yeah.
But there, with every advancement, be it television, radio, internet, AI, you have possibilities and dangers. And I'm sure he would look at it from both ends. Let's take advantage of its possibilities, but be very, very careful about its dangers and study its dangers and be prepared to protect the church and the teaching from the dangers.
Yeah. So, Edward, we've been, discussing quite a bit on the cardinal, is there, maybe before we wrap up, is there anything that you might want to share about, any last thoughts on the late Cardinal Deskur?
Definitely. I have a whole number of, where is that list? Yeah. One thing I thought I thought was very interesting that I learned from him was he explained to me the classic understanding of primus inter pares. You know that the first among equals. Because the Pope is a bishop primarily, but he's the first bishop among all bishops, and that means he's not a dictator like people tend to think the Pope is. He's of course a monarch. He has the first and the last word, but not the only word. And my understanding of his understanding is that in the tradition of the Church, the Pope has the obligation to listen to his equals, to listen to the other bishops. And there's an expression in Latin, ponderandum non numerandum, meaning that when he makes his final decisions, it should be based on the weight of the argument. The strongest, heaviest argument should carry the day, and not the number of bishops that support one position or the other. So it could be a position that the Pope believes has the greatest weight, but isn't supported by a large number of bishops or cardinals. And I really like that idea. That, first of all, it's not a steep dominant hierarchy in the sense that only he has anything to say and everybody has to listen to him and do what he says. Of course they do have to listen to him. He's their boss. He's the monarch. He's the Pope. But he also has the obligation to listen. That's why I was very happy to hear when Pope Leon was saying, I want to listen. And people who know him say, he's very good at listening. He doesn't speak as much as he listens. And that's very important because cardinals and bishops, they are more or less they should be in the same league of spiritual development and understanding of the church. And if somebody at the very top doesn't want to listen to somebody who's lower in the hierarchy that has a really good idea, then that hierarchy won't reach its full potential. Like in the orchestra, the same situation. If you have an orchestra where a conductor doesn't want to hear anything from the musicians, he's just issuing directives, that orchestra will never achieve its full potential. And I've been a witness to many situations where excellent ideas come out of the orchestra that the conductor ultimately approves and says, okay, let's do it this way. And they're wonderful. And that orchestra wouldn't achieve its full potential if there wasn't that communication between the people lower in the hierarchy and the ultimate decision maker. And that is how the church should work. And I think that's a really interesting idea. And this primus inter pares idea is not only in the church. You see that in some courts, you see that in some governments. The Swiss government, for example, has 7 equal members, but one is the president for 1 year and leads the meetings, but they're all equals and they have to listen to each other. And I think that's very good. And the church will definitely have problems when the Pope stops listening to people. And it's very important that he has good communication and open communication with everybody, because they're very complicated issues and some people might have better insights when they're not in Rome. I mean, yeah, I'll just leave it with that.
Mm-hmm. All right. Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you very much, Edward. I just wanted to, maybe end off with, mentioning what Pope John Paul II said when he appointed Cardinal Deskur. He said this, right? I've been particularly close to him since my student days, since our brotherly days at the Jagiellonian University, then through the seminary, through my years as a priest, through many meetings in Rome, in particular through the last meeting that took place just before the conclave. It was then that divine providence touched Bishop Andrzej Deskur with the severe disability that he still carries with him today. Among all the cardinals created today, he was the only one in a wheelchair. He brings to this college a special mark, the mark of suffering that is a sacrifice. We do not know God's ways, we do not know God's mysteries, but I personally find it difficult to resist the conviction that this sacrifice of Archbishop Andrzej, now Cardinal Andrzej, was connected with the conclave that took place in mid-October 1978, in which he was then elected the Pope of the Catholic Church. Right. With that, thank you very much, Edward. It's been a pleasure. I've never imagined myself being able to speak to a nephew of the late Cardinal, and I hope to have, to catch up with you sometime again.
Well, thank you for the honor of the invitation. I was happy to share the little tidbits of information that I was able to learn from him. I'm very happy to share that.
Yeah, thank you.